as Executive Vice President of Government Relations from 2015 to 2020, and Curtis also serves on the boards of the NAB Leadership Foundation and the Broadcasters Foundation of America. Curtis has been featured in Washingtonian magazine as one of Washington's 500 most influential people. He was named Radio Executive of the Year by Radio Inc. magazine and as a top lobbyist by the Hill newspaper. Before joining NAB in 2011, Curtis served as senior counsel to then Senate Judiciary Chairman Patrick Leahy, as an associate at Howry LLP in Washington, as a management consultant for Putnam Associates, and as a staff member of the 2008 Obama for America presidential campaign. Curtis serves on the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention's Executive Committee, and on the board as well of Tracy's Kids, a nonprofit helping children with cancer. He's also an alumnus of Leadership Music, a program based in Nashville. Curtis received his law degree from Cornell University Law School and a bachelor's degree in quantitative economics from Providence College, where he serves on its national board of overseers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our good friend, distinguished guest, Mr. Curtis LeGeyt.
We need to give you the truncated version of that bio next time. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here today to discuss the critical role of local television and radio stations, the challenges our industry faces, and the opportunities that lie ahead for broadcasters and the audiences we serve. Before I begin, I want to express my sincere gratitude to Rick Kaplar, Dick Wiley, and the Media Institute for giving me the opportunity to join you today. Let's give them a round of applause. I also want to thank all of you for being here. Your presence underscores the vital role we all play in ensuring a vibrant and innovative media landscape. I feel incredibly fortunate to represent America's broadcasters. They are beacons of our democracy. Every day they exercise their First Amendment right to report, inform, and help citizens understand the issues that affect their daily lives. And let's just address the elephant in the room here. This is not an easy time to be a broadcast journalist. It's not an easy time to report on the deluge of information that is shaping our world. It's not an easy time to cut through the polarized rhetoric to find the truth. And yet, there has never been a more critical time to arm Americans with the facts and let them make their own decisions. To fulfill this mission, our newsrooms must be able to report without fear or favor. This isn't just a constitutionally protected right, it is fundamental to serving our communities. Any effort to limit broadcasters' ability to report the facts threatens the public's right to know and chills free speech. Americans deserve the full and fair reporting that broadcasters provide, and NAB strongly defends our members' First Amendment rights and their vital role in maintaining an informed public. Our democracy relies on journalists' ability to report the news without the risk of government retribution. In a media environment flooded with social media misinformation and cable news politicization, this role has never been more important. With this backdrop, I am incredibly proud of the hard work being done by our local newsrooms around the country. Many other media companies and platforms make important contributions to the economy, yet no other industry can do what local broadcasters do. We provide an essential public service that is freely available and accessible to everyone. In an age when newspapers continue to shutter at an average of more than 2 a week, and media companies are not just national, but global, local broadcasters are committed to the needs of the communities we serve, using our First Amendment rights to inform the public. No big tech algorithm will ever replicate this vital service. During times of emergency, when people don't know where to turn, they look to their local broadcasters. During national events, when Americans want news they know they can trust, they look to local broadcasters. And for the moments that we all want to experience together, whether it's the Super Bowl or election night returns, they look to local broadcasters. And while I feel fortunate to wake up each day knowing the work of our members is a fundamental bedrock of American democracy, at the same time I'm worried. The government's failure to adapt its regulations to a changing media landscape has pushed local broadcasting to the precipice, one that looks eerily familiar to the neglect that led to the newspaper's demise. And the alarm is so significant that last year, then FCC Commissioner and now Chairman Brendan Carr implored his colleagues in Congress to act because, in his words, broadcasters are at a break glass moment. Chairman Carr was signaling that if we don't act quickly, the future of local broadcasting is at great risk. And I agree. So how did we get here? What can we do about it? And importantly, what could we lose if we don't act now? First, how did we get here? Local broadcasting is a highly regulated business in a rapidly evolving sector of the economy. Rapid evolution and government regulation are words that historically do not go together. And as broadcasters, we have lived through that disconnect. For years, the FCC has treated TV and radio broadcasting as though it exists in isolation, ignoring the rise of cable, satellite, streaming, and social media platforms that dominate today's media consumption. These new competitors are not bound by the same public interest obligations as local stations, nor do they face the same regulatory burdens. And so while broadcasters are restrained by regulations, big tech continues to get bigger, dominating the media landscape and consumers' attention. They extract advertising revenue from local communities only to concentrate that wealth in Silicon Valley, all while operating free from the ownership restrictions placed on local broadcast stations. The result? A playing field that is anything but level. While streaming services like Netflix, YouTube, and Spotify reach all Americans, broadcasters are held back by complex ownership regulations that don't give stations a fighting chance. And meanwhile, tech platforms like Google and Facebook offer businesses an advertising proposition that is unlimited in its scale either locally, nationally, or globally, an offering that broadcasters simply cannot match because the government won't allow us to. Times have changed drastically, and these regulations, broad, strict regulations that were imposed before the internet even existed, must also change to keep up with the times. Two data points stand out that reflect the current state of the media marketplace. First, YouTube now accounts for 1/10 of all the TV that Americans watch, the most of any video service, broadcast, cable, or streaming. And second, according to Pew Research, 1/3 of adults under 30 now get their news from TikTok. Make no mistake, we welcome competition on a level playing field that incents us to up our game. But YouTube and TikTok aren't on the ground reporting around the clock when wildfires race through the neighborhoods or hurricanes destroy entire towns. They don't send reporters to the Potomac River at night when there's a tragic air disaster or offer reporting based on how that devastating event impacted the DC and Wichita communities. They don't go live and stay live for as long as it takes to tell the public what they need to know, before, during, and in the aftermath of a tragic event. Big tech can't and won't do what local broadcasters do. Big tech is interested in clicks, not public service, and it is past time for our stations to have a fair chance to compete to enable them to keep doing what they do best, being there when it matters most. The FCC must and can act quickly to address this imbalance, but we don't have time to slow roll these changes. So what can we do about it? For decades, the FCC has maintained strict ownership regulations on local TV and radio broadcasters. These rules were put in place when broadcasting was virtually the only game in town. There is an FCC-imposed cap on the national reach of any one television broadcaster. Right now, a single company is only allowed to serve a little more than 1/3 of all American homes, 39% to be exact. But Netflix, YouTube, and Amazon have no such limit. They can reach 100% of households. Only local broadcasters remain burdened by regulations that no longer reflect market realities. These local stations must have the ability to scale up and compete for audience and the advertising dollars that allow us to invest in providing vital emergency information and local news to communities. The FCC should first eliminate this national cap that undermines broadcasters' ability to compete with these global behemoths. Second, the FCC must modernize local TV and radio ownership rules. Again, these are relics of the past. Current FCC rules largely prevent TV broadcasters from owning 2 of the top 4 rated broadcast stations in the media market. Not 2 of the top 4 most watched video services in the market, just broadcast stations. This ignores the vast array of competition broadcasters now face, from streaming platforms to social media giants, and most importantly, the fact that in many markets, communities would be best served by a pool of investment in 1 or 2 strong local newsrooms, rather than 4 under-resourced entities. News is costly to produce, and stations invest big money to keep reporters in their local communities. Without a necessary course correction in our ability to compete for local advertising, local newsrooms will continue to downsize, robbing the community of its voice. Eliminating these regulations will allow local stations to aggregate resources, invest in journalism, and strengthen service to their communities. For local radio, outdated rules limit the number of stations a company can provide to each community, depending on the size of that market. This severely limits consumer choice, as well as investment in local radio stations, hindering our ability to innovate, grow, and provide more choices for listeners. Meanwhile, streaming services like Spotify, SiriusXM, and Apple have no limits. They can offer as many channels as they like. The trade-off? It'll cost you a subscription fee. Meanwhile, a local radio group which offers a product that is locally focused and freely available to all is restricted in its ability to offer more than 5 FM stations in many markets. These national and local ownership rules were crafted to promote competition, but in practice they give big tech a free pass to dominate and serve audiences with content based on algorithms that reinforce our biases and divide us rather than bring us together. In contrast, local stations deliver content that is meant to serve our collective community. Yet we are competing with both arms tied behind our backs. The consequences of this are alarming. So finally, without government action to enable broadcasters to better compete, what could we lose? First, vital journalism. The demise of newspapers has left a growing void in local news, one that broadcasters are working hard to fill despite regulatory roadblocks. As newspapers across the country shutter their doors, local TV and radio stations are stepping in to fill that gap. They are ensuring our communities still have access to the vital local news, verified information, and stories they need to stay informed, connected, and engaged. But we can do more. Research shows that as broadcast companies are allowed to grow, the hours of local news they provide grows too. In the past decade, even as the number of television station groups nationwide has decreased, the total hours of local broadcast news has increased by 33%. And that makes sense, because it is what our communities value most. It's our unique offering that they can't get from TikTok, Spotify, or Apple. And for this reason, the trust audiences place in broadcasters is unmatched. A recent study found that 73% of adults trust local television news, and 65% trust news on the radio. This far surpasses trust in social media. Second, access to freely available live sports is at risk. How many of us were gathered around the TV with friends and family last week to watch the Philadelphia Eagles win the Super Bowl? Keith, I told you it would be pulling.
Next year.
Football continues to clinch 93 of the top 100 most watched broadcast programs each week, but because of their massive size, big tech companies like Amazon and Netflix are increasingly able to pay huge amounts to peel away big games from broadcast and air them exclusively on streaming platforms. This takes games off local TV stations that air them for free to the masses. Without changes to the rules to give broadcasters the scale to more fairly compete for these rights, sports fans may soon need even more streaming subscriptions to watch their favorite teams. And while that would be a huge loss to the American way of life, reserving sports for the privileged few, it is secondary to my final point, which is the harm posed if local stations no longer maintain the economic viability to warn and protect our citizens in times of emergency. The recent wildfires in Southern California reinforce the indispensable role of broadcasters. As fires spread rapidly through neighborhoods, local stations in the area provided wall-to-wall coverage, with viewership doubling and even tripling as people turned to the trusted voices they rely on during crises. Allowing broadcasters to compete will give local stations the ability to invest in our journalists, our highly valued content, our weather technology, and our newsrooms. We are doing our part to serve our communities at the very time they need us most. And we look forward to working with the FCC and Congress to do their part to ensure local broadcasters can be unshackled from the outdated rules that have held us back for too long. The time to act is now. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. I look forward to continuing this important dialogue with all of you, because the fact is, it impacts all of us. Together, we can ensure that broadcasting remains indispensable to our communities for generations to come. Now, I welcome your questions.
So you touched on sports. Let's assume a world where you're deregulated by the government, right? If sports moves exclusively to big tech, how does broadcasting survive? And what is the solution to keep that from happening?
Well, listen, there's no doubt that consumers are attracted to the value proposition that large-scale sporting events on broadcast provides. And there are consumers accessing it free over the air. Obviously, there is a simplicity to having your major sporting event available through more traditional pay TV models. And make no mistake, we are also partnering, our networks are offering to offer those sports through streaming services as well. The concern is exclusive rights moving away from the broadcast and more traditional ecosystem over to an environment where they're exclusively pay only. Our hope is that the leagues will, recognizing the reach that broadcast provides, that no other medium provides. We already see sports around the country, frankly, coming back to broadcast as there's been a bit of a reset in the RSN model. But we need to have the ability to compete for these sports rights. These are high dollar events, and the only way to compete with these behemoths that, make no mistake, even if we're getting a national reach through deregulation, local broadcasters are still not global in their reach. There's going to be an inherent disadvantage, but the regulations make that disadvantage even more difficult. So our view is the leagues, for different reasons, appreciate the value proposition of broadcast. There is a synergy here between what local stations provide their individual sports teams paired with what our national networks can provide the leagues in terms of a reach and a simplicity of access. And if given the ability to fairly compete for those rights, I think we're going to win because of our value proposition.
Thank you.
David?
Thanks for being here, Curtis. I wanted to ask about Next Gen TV.
Yeah.
Where do you think things will be for the industry by the end of this year?
So,
Or where do you hope they'll be?
Great question, David. Well, I'm extremely excited about Next Gen TV, ATSC 3.0 for the engineers in the room. And really, we're excited to get this value out to consumers, right? You're talking about a better picture, more immersive audio, but more importantly, interactive features through your over-the-air broadcast, hyper-localized content. The value proposition that I just spent some time detailing and the context of ownership, ATSC 3.0 can take that proposition on the television side to the next level. We are at a place right now where ATSC 3.0 is accessible to roughly 75% of the population, launched in more than 80 markets. We're really pleased with the progress that was made through the Future of Television initiative, which brought together stakeholders from the broadcast industry, pay TV industry, consumer electronics industry, as you know well, as well as consumer groups, to really distill where are the issues where we have commonality, see a path forward, and then what are those outstanding issues where we may not completely see eye to eye because we come from different areas of the ecosystem that we're going to need to work closely with the FCC to work out. I think as a result of that initiative, we are really poised to work with the new FCC, with Chairman Carr, with the other 3 commissioners who are currently seated, to move this transition from where it is today, again, 80 markets, 75% of the country, to a full, both industry-wide and nationwide transition. And we look forward to outlining a detailed proposal for the FCC as to how we can accomplish that nationwide transition with some specific markers to get there, and working with all of our industry partners to get this over the finish line, because that's what it's going to take for consumers to recognize the value proposition here. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about which is more fun, beer or broadcasting, but instead referring to your previous career. But I wanted to find out, in particular, how 2 things. You alluded to the Pew study. Nielsen had another study recently, an annual study, which is showing the under 38 years old audience doesn't look at broadcasting. 25% or less look at broadcasting ever. How do you respond to that? And also, how with the collaboration of these major broadcasters, Sinclair and others who are working on data delivery systems, how does that affect the future of broadcasting when it's a data delivery business, not a video delivery business? Or is it both?
Well, first off, just to get to your introductory point, while a number of my colleagues did come from the beer industry, my experience in the beer industry was primarily during college. So I don't have that frame of reference. But let me say this. I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack here, and I think what it underscores is our industry's need to innovate, to meet consumers where they are, however they want to access our programming. We believe there is a unique value in our community investment, our focus. That's going to be our competitive advantage. None of those tech or pay TV competitors are boots on the ground the way local broadcasters are, and in order to maintain that competitive advantage, which is going to draw audiences in because we are going to be the only ones offering it, continue to be, we need to have the resources to invest in those local newsrooms rather than trying to compete through cost cutting, which I think is a downward spiral that at the end of the day takes away and undermines the thing that is our single biggest draw. So we need to double down on our commitment to localism, and we need to innovate in how we are providing that local content to users. And yes, it is the traditional linear delivery, but it's also the interactions, the engagement of our local personalities, whether that is through other means, podcasting, social media, digital. We're not saying don't touch any of that, but the core local broadcast needs to be the primary piece of that value proposition. And I think as long as local stations are committed to that, and I know they are, so long as the government will allow them to be and to compete and to succeed that way, I think we're going to do just fine with every demographic. Other questions?
My name is Dana Shearer. I work at Congressional Research Service. What are NAB's top legislative priorities? And in particular, what's your, well, I guess this is the second issue, but what's your outlook about retransmission consent revenues for broadcasters?
Sure. So first and foremost, our top priority in Washington right now for both local television and local radio is modernization of ownership rules. Period. Hard stop. If we don't have the ability to compete on a level playing field with tech in this heavily disrupted landscape, our policy positions on just about every other issue, and I'm happy to send you, our year in review and our forward-looking policy agendas. But you'll see there's a lot in there My view for our industry is, if we don't solve this and give ourselves the ability to compete and invest in our local product, then our progress on every other issue in Washington, D.C. becomes moot. So that is our top issue. We believe the FCC has the ability to act both with regard to the national cap and the local television and radio rules, but we are certainly going to be working with members of Congress to continue to educate them on the urgency here, to ensure in their oversight capacity that they are providing the FCC with the support that they need and any questions around the legal backdrop. In addition, we, on our television side, are heavily prioritizing the deployment of ATSC 3.0. The FCC has done its part up to this point in terms of enabling a voluntary transition, but more specificity is needed now that the Future of Television initiative is complete to take this transition from where it is today, 70, 80 markets, 75% of the country, to a nationwide transition. And the FCC is really going to need to put its imprimatur there in partnership with Congress. Several members of the Senate Commerce Committee, both sides of the aisle, have been working closely in their oversight capacity with the FCC, ensuring this transition is on track, and we're going to be doubling down on that. And then for our radio members, it's passage of the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. This is legislation that ensures that every newly manufactured automobile includes access to AM radio. The bill has already been reintroduced. This Congress has passed through almost unanimously the Senate Commerce Committee. Last Congress had 63 Senate co-sponsors, bipartisan, filibuster-proof majority, 270 House co-sponsors. Has support from more than 125 outside non-broadcast groups, ranging in the political and policy spectrum from the National Urban League to the Farm Bureau, the AARP, Heritage Action. So we feel that there's a unique moment here with regard to radio and the automobile to ensure that it's going to maintain its place in the connected car for decades to come.
Hi, Amy McLean with CableFax. You've spoke a lot about localism today, and as you talk about loosening media ownership rules, I'm wondering, is there any sort of codification that your members might be interested in showing that you're not going to have a big affiliate group repurposing newscasts all over the country or sharing resources in that way?
Well, listen, we are open to any conversation and proposal that either the FCC or a member of Congress might have to better ensure our ability to serve local communities. History has shown that in those areas where broadcasters today have been able to gain scale, whether that's on the national level or in local markets where some waivers have been granted to allow ownership of more than one Big Four station, that it has resulted in more local news. The marketplace is extremely competitive for nationalized content. It's extremely competitive for content that reinforces your politics regardless of what side you're on. The model for local broadcasters only wins if we are focused on local communities. So that, from my perspective, is something that is going to be marketplace driven, that commitment to local communities. But we certainly welcome a conversation with any policymaker who would like to discuss a proposal that will ensure better service to our local community. So I understand your concern, but I believe that's a concern that local broadcasters are prepared to address if we've got the scale to do it.
Well, Curtis, thank you so much for a very powerful presentation.